Hello guys, this is Doronsmovies, and in this World of Warcraft guide I will be teaching you how to roleplay as a dwarf. Now we will go over a few points, and for starters I'm going to give you a quick insight into their lore and how they got to where they are now and why do we even have the dwarves as a playable race. Although I won't go full into detail like crazy on the lore in this video, as I plan on covering the dwarves in like a lore lesson in the future, something similar like I did with Draenei before. So as I said, I'm not going to go like super crazy on the lore in this video, and after that I'm going to give you a few guidelines on which classes you can pick, how to act like a dwarf, talk like a dwarf, and also some insight into their traditions, relations and religion and all of that. So without further ado, let's start with some lore behind the dwarves. So dwarves are just like the trolls. They are one of the oldest races on the world of Azeroth, but the only difference is that they were constructed by the Titans and were called the Earthen, and the initial Earthen were affected by the curse of flesh that came from the old gods, and it turned the first ones into today's Trogs. However, the dwarves we have today are the so-called Series 2 Earthen, and yes, they were still affected by the Curse of Flesh, but they weren't like turned into these Trogs, but they were turned into dwarves instead, the ones we have today, and meaning that they kept their mentality and all of that, but they lost their super hard skin and changed it in a favor of a new softer one with some flesh. So after the Great Sundering, that was around 10,000 years ago, they were very deeply affected by the destruction of the earth because they're very connected to it, and they hibernated for approximately 8,000 years or so. They went into their ancient towns, and later on they merged and they started forming these cities that we have today. So Ironforge was built by the dwarves that came from the ancient Titan city of Uldaman. They came from that city around 2000 years ago, and not all of the dwarves got a soft skin, however, as some of them still have some differences. I mean, they have either a slight metallic skin or a sort of a stone skin, but still sort of a flesh skin, so it's not the same. But the playable dwarves we have today are just the ones with flesh and skin and everything, even though they have the stone form, but that's a bit different from their previous skin. Now, the dwarves encountered humans around 1800 years back, and very soon they became allies. I mean, the humans taught the dwarves how to write in common, they also taught them the ways of the light, while on the other side the dwarves taught the humans about metalworking, blacksmithing and all of that stuff. Now, the name dwarves comes from the humans. They weren't actually called dwarves, they are actually the Earthen, but they were called dwarves by the humans, even though the elves before insulted the Earthen by calling them dwarves. And the term itself sort of came as a derogatory term, but later on it kind of fit with the dwarves and they started using it, so they don't really mind if you call them dwarves. Now, around 200 years back, they also met the gnomes that we have today, and they were super impressed by their quickness, their intelligence, and they also shared the same flair for engineering, so a union between the two was bound to happen. Now, the dwarves helped the gnomes build Gnomeregan, and after the Third War, when the Trogs invaded it and all of that stuff happened, the intoxication and everything, they allowed them to refugee in their city of Ironforge, so that's why they had a little Tinker's town in Ironforge. Now, even though the dwarves and the humans were on good terms and were sort of allies, I mean, they met each other, they had some relations and all of that, but they only officially joined the alliance that we have today during the Second War, while uniting against the entire Horde invasion and the orcs and everything. I guess it's also worth mentioning that the Ironforge dwarves split into 3 clans, so you have the Bronzebeards, the Wildhammers, and the Dark Iron clan. Now, I won't go into full detail on it, I will cover it in the second part of the video, but as I said, I might do a lore lesson on it in the future. And I also covered Muradin, and I plan on covering a few other dwarf important figures. I covered Falstead and Kurdran as well, and I made that Shattering novel explanation thing, so you can check that out, as it mentions some parts of their lore, so you can find that on the channel. But pretty much, the 3 clans weren't really in best relations, and they only sort of made peace recently with the new Council of 3 Hammers and all of that. Now, this was just a quick overview into the lore. Now, let's get a bit into their appearance, traditions, and also how to name your dwarf and how to talk as a dwarf. Alright, so as you can obviously tell, the dwarves are generally short, although they can vary in height and all of that, but generally they're shorter than the average human, and most of them have these long beards, and it is very common in their tradition, it's kind of respected and all of that. I mean, the females are quite similar to them in height and all of that, and they're also stocky as well, but there has been some rare cases of females with beards, but that is not really common and was mostly inside the Wildhammer clan and not really all that much with the others. Alright, so now let's get some insight into their traditions and culture. So, dwarves, if you couldn't tell, generally love alcohol and are always around it, and it is kind of an essential part of their culture. They drink a lot, so they don't really get drunk all that easily, so if you want to RP a dwarf, don't go like passing out after like one mug of beer or something like that. But if you do it, don't really go overboard with alcohol thing, because a lot of people when they RP dwarves, they drink all the time and everything. I mean, just take it into consideration. I mean, it's an essential part of their culture, but just don't overdo it. Now, the dwarves are also very precise and patient, so if they make something, it has to be perfect, and every error they make has to be fixed. And this is why most of their cities that we see are so like clean cut and have all these like super well made symbols, and also that is why they're very known for their craftsmanship and all of that. Now, they're also born explorers and blacksmiths, and they love finding treasures and ancient pieces of the world as they're very connected to the earth. And architecture would be actually a great profession if you're a dwarf. You have the entire Explorers League and all of that. And blacksmithing is also closely related to the dwarves, as they're mostly known for their well-crafted weapons, armor and all of that stuff. Now, most of the dwarves are very tough and can even be compared to orcs to some extent in the entire honor in battle thing and brute strength. And orcs and dwarves, even though they're like huge enemies, they still kind of respect each other. For example, the orcs usually hate most of the races like humans and everything, but they still kind of have some respect for the dwarves when it comes to battle and all of that. And it does take for them some time to get someone's trust, but once that is accomplished, they can be very great and very loyal allies. And they also like guns and cannons, and axes and maces would be their kind of melee weapons of choice. Now, on the entire equality thing, well, the dwarves aren't really all that equal like some other races like you mentioned before, but they aren't really openly racist like some of the wild trolls and all of that. I mean, they don't really consider all of the races as equals like some do, and can sometimes say some racist stuff, but that is usually like in the heat of the moment, and they don't really do it all that often. Also, on women equality, well, it's pretty decent between the dwarves when it comes to that topic. I mean, there isn't really all that much sexism going on between them. However, some sources say that the dwarves might have been trying to date other races, which is mostly kind of an inside joke, as the dwarf women aren't really considered the pinnacle of beauty and all of that. Now, religion-wise, it really varies, and they don't really have a set-in religion. I mean, some of them follow the light, some believe in titans, while others are kind of into shamanism. So you kind of have your hands open, and it really depends on which class you pick and what sort of a RP style you're going for. Alright, so let's get into how to speak like a dwarf. So obviously, if you couldn't tell, they have a sort of a Scottish or even Irish type of an accent to some extent, but generally they say some of the words differently. I mean, just like the trolls, I will put some basic phrases on the screen so you can check that out. But an example, they would call men lads, they would call female lasses. For example, you, they would say yeah, or your, they would say yer, etc. And there is a few like phrases I will put on the screen, as I said. But generally, it's not really that hard to get into their accents, but it does take some time to get used to it and to type like that. But in the end, it can actually be pretty fun. Alright, now let's go into how to name your dwarf. Now, I don't think there are any sort of set rules on how to name your dwarf, so, like for example you had with the trolls. But I've noticed that they have a first and a last name, and generally last name can be feature based. An example, Bronzebeard, Greybeard, Wildhammer, Flamebeard, and a few other names. Now on the first name, generally I would suggest using a name generator because it's actually quite similar to most fantasy dwarven names, just like in Lord of the Rings, so their names are kind of like these typical dwarf names when you look at the fantasy world. So names like Belgan, Thoradin and a few others like that can work quite well. Alright, lastly let's go over the Ironforge clans and all the classes you can pick as a dwarf. Now, clans are very important between the dwarves, and there are actually 3 of them. I mean, there is a bunch of other clans, but I'm just covering the playable ones. You have the Bronzebeard clan, the Wildhammer clan, and the Dark Iron clan. Now, they weren't really in best relations, but now they're kind of starting to get together in the midst of Pandaria, and I'm guessing in the future as well. And they also have quite some differences. For example, the Bronzebeards are technologically advanced, while Wildhammers aren't all that much, but they're also very close to the earth and they value shamanism a lot, while Dark Irons are known to delve into forbidden magics and all of that. Now, each clan has its own sub-clans and a bunch of them, but I will only give you a basic insight into the main thing, and I will also cover the classes separate, even though some classes can be unique to a clan, but if I do that, like if I cover all of the classes for each clan, the video would take super long, and it is pretty long as it is. Okay, so firstly we have the Bronzebeard clan. Now, the Bronzebeard clan is one of the biggest clans of all, and currently it is ruled by Muradin Bronzebeard, which, if you didn't know, he's the dwarf from Warcraft 3 that was in Northrend with Artis, and he kind of led that dwarf expedition that was there. Now, previously it was led by Magni Bronzebeard, but due to the events of Shattering, his brother took over, and as I said, you can learn more about that in my Shattering explanation video. It explains how he turned into stone and how Muradin took over, but pretty much Muradin is now leading them, and he's a part of the Council of Three Hammers, and he's representing the Bronzebeards. Now, the Bronzebeard clan are located in Kaz Mountains, and they rule over the entire Dunmorog with their capital of Ironforge, even though Ironforge is split between all the clans, but their main area would be Dunmorog with Ironforge in the middle. Now, they're also very intelligent, but yet very brutal when it comes to combat. They can be warriors, soldiers, politicians, engineers, archaeologists, such as Bronzebeard, and a few other classes. As I said, I won't go too much into detail, but generally they're very technologically advanced, and they also have a very good relationship with the gnomes. Alright, next is the Wildhammer clan. The Wildhammers are mostly centered around hinterlands and Twilight Highlands, and they're a bit different from the Bronzebeards. They're mostly hill or mountain dwarves, and they also have a good relationship with the Griffins, very similar to the relationship between the Wolves and the Frostwolf clan and all of that, but they're also very close to the earth itself, and they also value shamanism a lot. Now, currently they're led and represented by Falstead Wildhammer, and I did make a lore lesson on him quite some time ago. You can check that out on my channel if you want to learn more about him into like full detail. There was also one about Kurdren Wildhammer, which was one of their previous leaders. Okay, and lastly, there is the Dark Iron clan. Now, their history is very closely tied with the War of the Three Hammers. Pretty much, as I mentioned previously, they weren't really on great terms, all of the three clans. And once they were in like this huge war called the War of the Three Hammers, they failed to take control over Ironforge, and they settled and founded a city in Redridge Mountains, where they attacked the dwarves from. Now, Torisan, their leader, tried to summon an ancient evil force called Ragnaros, which was once banished by the Titans ages ago, and Torisan succeeded in doing so, and his rebirth of Ragnaros reshaped all of the mountains of Redridge and made a volcano called the Black Rock Mountain today. Now, the Dark Iron clan was cursed and became the slaves to Ragnaros and his elementals, and most of the clan was pretty much cursed. Now, as I said previously, you can check out my Shattering video on more information on how they joined the Alliance, but in Cataclysm, a part of the Dark Irons together with Moira joined the Alliance, and now they are a part of Three Hammers. They're also, as I said, led by Moira, and they mostly reside in Ironforge. Alright, and lastly, let's get into some classes that you can choose if you want to RP a Dwarf. So I will go over only a few classes in this video, just like with the previous guides, but you have a lot of guides on Dwarf RP on the internet, and there is so much information, So if you want to check a certain class that I didn't really cover, you can check that out on the internet. I mean, there's a bunch of, even on the forums and all of that. Now, before you pick a class, decide which clan you want to be from and what your plans are, even though most of these classes I'm going to mention are kind of universal when it comes to all of the clans. Now, first class would be the warrior. Now, warrior is almost a perfect class for a dwarf. I mean, they love blacksmithing, they love weapons, axes, guns, they like to fight, and all of that. They're also short, but very strong, and are honorable in the battlefield. So if you pick this class, you can go about it in a few ways. Now, either you can just be a very honorable soldier, you can be an explorer that doesn't really use all that much strength, as uses his intelligence, but he can also put up a fight. You can also be an adventurer or a treasure hunter, also mercenary. So it is your choice, and this class is as universal as it gets when it comes to choices. Now, next would be the hunter. Now, just like the warrior, hunter is another great universal class and could be one of the most perfect classes for the dwarves, and you can go about it in many ways. Now, most of the hunters are either sharpshooters or riflemen, and just like in Warcraft 3, this is a very common class, and they can also be trackers and be good with nature and all of that, and their favorite companions would definitely be the bears. Now, you can use a bow like some hunters, but rifles in general are like dwarves' best friends, as they love all of the aspects of guns, explosions and all of that. So if you want to play a hunter, I would suggest getting a good rifle and a bear, and you should be on your way. Okay, and the next class would be the shamans. Now, this is kind of a bit conflicting, but still relatable at the same time. Now, the dwarves once were earthen, so they're very connected to the nature, but they also like to dig stuff up, which the elementals don't really like. But if you want to be a shaman, now would be like the best time to go about it, as most shamans are Wildhammer dwarves, as they always valued shamanism, and they kind of have a different lifestyle from the different dwarves. So Wildhammer clan would be your perfect choice here if you want to be a shaman. However, you can also go with another clan, as a lot of other dwarves are starting to learn shamanism as well. And lastly, I'm going to cover priests and paladins. Now, this is also a good way to RP a dwarf, even though it might not be all that great with their traditions, as dwarves don't really like magics, or don't really have a high opinion on magics. Even though light isn't really a magic, they always think of it as tricks. As I said, they're pretty stubborn and all of that. Now, this is why I won't really be going into mages and warlocks and all of that like magic stuff in this video, but as I said, you can check that out on the internet or on the forums and all of that. But generally, dwarves were taught the ways of the light by the humans long ago, and it is very well respected within the dwarf community. So being a holy priest or a paladin could be a good way to go about it, even though it might not be very closely tied to the dwarven traditions. Alright, and that is all I have for this guide. Thanks so much for watching, and do give me some suggestions and feedback on which races you would like to see covered next, as I do plan on covering all of the races at some point and like compiling it into this playlist, so everyone that wants to get into RP can check it out, as it should contain like all of the races, like guides and everything. And as I said, thanks a lot for taking your time to watch this video, and don't forget to like, favorite and subscribe, as it really helps out to keep these videos going and all of these guides and lore lessons and everything. So, thanks for watching, and see you next time.